Congresswoman Omar, as of 6 a.m. this morning, you are the subject of an FBI criminal investigation. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino's words cut through the House Judiciary Committee hearing room like a gunshot. No preamble, no introduction, no warning. The words hung in the air for half a second. The amount of time it takes for the human brain to process something completely unexpected before the room exploded into chaos. Ilhan Omar froze mid-sentence, her prepared attack on Bongino's partisan bias and dangerous agenda dying on her lips. Her mouth actually hung open slightly, her hand still raised in mid-gesture from whatever point she'd been making. You have the right to have legal counsel present. Bongino continued in the flat professional tone of a cop who'd read Miranda rights 1,000 times. You have the right to decline to answer questions that might incriminate you under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? Chairman Jim Jordan's gavel was banging. Reporters were shouting. Democrats were on their feet. Republicans leaned forward with expressions ranging from shock to grim satisfaction. Camera operators scrambled to get the best angle on Omar's face as the color drained from it. What? Omar's voice cracked, the confident tone she'd carried into the hearing completely shattered. This is outrageous. Mr. Chairman, this is political persecution. This is exactly what I warned. Ma'am, Bongino interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a knife through warm butter. On December 18, 2022, you traveled to Doha, Qatar, where you met with Sultan bin Saud Al Mariyaki, Qatar's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, and Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, the Prime Minister of Qatar. This was an unreported meeting. You failed to properly notify the State Department as required by House ethics rules for foreign travel by members of Congress. He opened a red folder stamped with classification markings: Top Secret SI, no foreign signals, intelligence, no foreign nationals. The kind of evidence that came from NSA intercepts and couldn't be shared with America's closest allies. 22 days after that meeting, on January 9, 2023, a company called Meadowbrook Consulting LLC registered in the Cayman Islands. Wire transferred exactly $250 to E Street Group, the political consulting firm owned by your husband Tim Monet. Bongino slid a document across the table. A wire transfer receipt. The numbers were clear. The date was clear. The amount was clear. FBI Financial Forensics traced Meadowbrook Consulting LLC through 3 intermediary shell corporations back to Qatar Foundation International, a Qatari state-owned entity directly controlled by the Qatari government. In other words, Congresswoman, 22 days after meeting with senior Qatari officials, the Qatari government paid your husband's company $250,000. He pulled out another document, a timeline chart with dates, amounts, and votes listed in clear columns. And then over the next 7 months, you cast 7 votes in the House of Representatives that aligned perfectly, and I mean perfectly, with Qatari foreign policy interests. You voted against designating Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. You opposed arms sales to Saudi Arabia. You questioned U.S. military presence in the Middle East. Every single vote matched Qatar's geopolitical interests. Bongino looked up from his documents, his expression hard as granite. You met with Qatari officials. They paid your husband $250 to $1. You voted exactly how they wanted you to vote. That's not foreign policy disagreement, Congresswoman. That's bribery. That's acting as an unregistered foreign agent. That's conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that's why, as of this morning, you are under FBI investigation for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and federal money laundering statutes. The hearing room was in absolute pandemonium. Now CNN had cut to breaking news coverage. MSNBC looked shell-shocked. Fox News was running Omar under FBI investigation sirens. Twitter had probably already crashed. Omar's hands were shaking. Her lawyer, when had he arrived, was frantically whispering in her ear, trying to get her to stop talking, to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights to shut down before more damage was done. But Omar couldn't help herself. You have been reading my emails, my bank records. This is surveillance of a sitting member of Congress. This is, ma'am. Bongino interrupted again, and this time his voice carried an edge of something cold and dangerous. When foreign governments pay United States Congress members in exchange for votes, that's a national security threat. The FBI didn't start by surveilling you. We were surveilling them, the Qatari officials you met with. That's completely legal under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act for foreign intelligence collection purposes. He pulled out another document, This one with heavy redactions, but still readable. And when the National Security Agency intercepted communications between those Qatari government officials discussing payments to an American congresswoman when they specifically used your name when they outlined exactly what they expected you to do in return for that $250. That's when you became part of a counterintelligence investigation. Bongino's eyes locked onto Omar's. We have the intercepts, Congresswoman. We have Qatari officials discussing you by name, discussing the payment, discussing your votes. One official 3 weeks after the money was transferred said, and I'm reading directly from the translated and declassified transcript, Omar has been very helpful. The $250 investment was worthwhile. She will continue to vote as we require on matters of importance to Qatar. The Americans are surprisingly easy to buy when you know their price. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. You were bought by Qatar for $250. And I have the receipts. Congresswoman, all of them, bank records, wire transfers, NSA intercepts, a documented pattern of votes that directly benefited a foreign government immediately after they paid you. Bongino leaned forward slightly. So when you ask how the American people can trust me to be impartial as FBI Deputy Director, I'd suggest you're asking the wrong question. The question Americans should be asking is, how can they trust you to represent them when you're actually representing Qatar? Omar sat frozen in her chair, her face ashen. Her carefully prepared attack on Bongino's confirmation had backfired spectacularly. She'd thought she was interrogating him about his fitness for office. She'd had no idea he'd been investigating her. She'd walked into an ambush and there was no way out. You're going to need a lawyer. Congresswoman, Bongino said, his tone matter of fact. A good one, a very good one, because what I just described is only the Qatar money. We haven't even discussed Turkey yet. Or Somalia or your campaign finance violations or the immigration fraud or the member chairman. Omar's lawyer was on his feet. Now I need to confer with my client. I request a recess. Denied? Chairman Jordan said, his voice carrying across the chaos. Deputy Director Bongino was invited here to testify about FBI operations. He's testifying. Representative Omar chose to question him. She's getting her answers. We'll continue. Jordan looked at Bongino with something approaching respect. Deputy Director, please proceed. Dan Bongino smiled the cold, professional smile of a cop who just gotten a confession. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to continue. This is going to take a while. He had 4 more folders, and all of them had Ilhan Omar's name on them. Bongino opened his first folder with the careful precision of a prosecutor who'd organized his evidence for maximum impact. 25 years as a cop, NYPD Secret Service, now FBI. Had taught him that presentation mattered almost as much as the evidence itself. Let's start with the money. Congresswoman, because money tells us everything we need to know. FBI financial forensics is an art form. We can trace a dollar through a dozen shell companies across multiple countries through cryptocurrency conversions. We can follow money anywhere. And we followed yours. He pulled out a large diagram and had it displayed on the screens throughout the hearing room. It showed a flowchart of money moving through various corporate entities. This is $250 making a journey. Let me walk you through it. December 18, 2022. You meet with Qatari government officials in Doha. No official record, no State Department notification, just you, them, and whatever you discussed in private. December 28, 2022. Qatar Foundation International, a Qatari state entity, transfers $250 to Meadowbrook Consulting LLC, a Cayman Islands shell corporation that was created exactly 3 weeks earlier. The company has no employees, no office, no website. It exists solely to receive and transfer money. January 3rd Road, 2023. Meadowbrook transfers the money to Atlantic Advisory Group, a Delaware LLC. Same story. No employees, no office, created 1 month earlier. January 6th, 2023. Atlantic Advisory transfers the money to Strategic Outreach Partners, another shell company, this one based in Nevada. January 9th, 2023. Strategic Outreach Partners transfers $250 to E Street Group, your husband Tim Manette's political consulting firm with the memo line consulting services rendered. Onino looked up from the chart. 4 transfers, 3 countries, multiple shell corporations created specifically to obscure the source of the money. This isn't normal business practice. Congresswoman, this is money laundering. This is exactly how you hide bribes from foreign governments. Representative Matt Gaetz leaned into his microphone. Deputy Director, just to be clear, There's no legitimate business reason for all these transfers through shell companies. None whatsoever. Congressman, if Tim Manette's firm was actually providing consulting services to Qatar Foundation International, they could wire the money directly. One transfer done, but they didn't do that because they needed to hide where the money came from. They needed plausible deniability. And did it work? Gates asked. No, sir, because FBI financial forensics traced it anyway. We have the bank records from all 4 shell companies. We have the wire transfer documentation. We have emails between the people setting up these transfers discussing how to obscure the origin and maintain deniability. We have everything. Bongino turned back to Omar, who was staring at the chart on the screen as if seeing it for the first time. Congresswoman Omar, what consulting services did your husband's firm provide to Qatar Foundation International that justified a $250 payment? Omar's lawyer put his hand on her arm, but she pulled away. My husband's firm provides political consulting to various what services? Bongino interrupted. Specifically, what did he do for Qatar to earn $250? I don't involve myself in my husband's business. But you vote on issues that directly affect his clients. That makes it your business. So, let me ask again, what specific services did Tim Manette's firm provide Qatar? Silence. You can't answer because there were no services. East Street Group has never had any clients in Qatar. Never worked on any Middle Eastern campaigns. Has no expertise in Qatari affairs. The firm received a $4 million for doing absolutely nothing except being married to you. He pulled out another document. Let me tell you what Qatar got for their money. This is your voting record for the 7 months following the $250 payment, February 3, 2023, hour 342, designating Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a foreign terrorist organization. You voted no. You were one of only 9 members to vote against it. Qatar maintains close ties with Iran. Qatar opposed this designation. You voted Qatar's position. March 17, 2023. H.R. 881 authorizing arms sales to Saudi Arabia. You voted no. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have tense relations. Qatar opposed these sales. You voted Qatar's position. April 12, 2023. House resolution supporting continued U.S. military presence in Bahrain. You voted no. Qatar has competed with Bahrain for regional influence. Qatar opposed this resolution. You voted Qatar's position. May 8, 2023. H.R. 1247. Maintaining sanctions on Syria. You voted no and gave a floor speech advocating for lifting sanctions. Qatar has pushed for normalizing relations with Syria. You voted Qatar's position. June 2, 2023. Appropriations bill including $500 million for Israel's Iron Dome missile defense. You voted no. Qatar has criticized Israeli defense spending. You voted Qatar's position. July 15, 2023. Defense authorization, including increased funding for Middle East military partnerships. You voted no. Qatar has opposed increased U.S. military presence in the region. You voted Qatar's position. August 9, 2023. Emergency military aid package for Israel following terrorist attacks. You voted no. Qatar has opposed military aid to Israel. You voted Qatar's position. Bongino looked up from the list. 7 votes. 7 times you voted exactly how Qatar wanted you to vote. Every single vote directly aligned with Qatari foreign policy interests. Every single vote came after they paid you $250. That's not coincidence, Congresswoman. That's a transaction. You sold your vote to a foreign government. Representative Jim Jordan spoke up. Deputy Director, you mentioned NSA intercepts earlier. Can you elaborate on what those communications showed? I can discuss the declassified portions. Mr. Chairman, the NSA, as part of routine foreign intelligence collection, monitors communications of foreign government officials, including Qatari officials involved in their foreign influence operations. In late January 2023, approximately 3 weeks after the $250 payment to East Street Group, NSA intercepted a conversation between 2 senior Qatari officials discussing their efforts to influence U.S. policy. Bongino pulled out a document with some sections redacted but substantial portions readable. The conversation was in Arabic. NSA translated it. Let me read a portion. Official 1. The investment in the Congresswoman has proven worthwhile. She voted as expected on the Iran matter. Official 2. The amount was acceptable. Official 1. More than acceptable. For $250, we have secured a reliable vote on multiple issues. She understands the arrangement. Her husband handles the financial matters discreetly. Official 2. Will she continue to be useful? Official 1. Without question. We have 7 more votes coming in the next months where her position will matter. She will vote correctly on each. The Americans are surprisingly easy to buy when you know their price. She is now our asset. The hearing room was silent except for the frantic typing of reporters and the clicking of camera shutters. They called you their asset, Congresswoman. That's intelligence terminology for an agent. An operative, someone working for them, and they were correct. You voted exactly as they needed you to vote exactly when they needed those votes. Representative Nancy Mace raised her hand. Deputy Director. The Congresswoman could argue these votes reflected her genuine foreign policy beliefs. How do you prove the votes were because of the payment? Several ways. Congresswoman Mace. First, the timing. She'd never taken such consistently anti-Saudi, anti-Israel, pro-Qatar positions before receiving the money. Her voting record shifted dramatically after the payment. Second, we have those intercepted communications where Qatari officials explicitly state she'll vote as required. Third, and this is important, we have additional evidence I'm about to present. He pulled out what appeared to be phone records. FBI executed search warrants on Tim Manette's email accounts, phone records, and text messages. We found communications between him and intermediaries for the Qatari government. Let me read one text message from Tim M. to a man named Khalid al-Mansuri, who FBI has identified as a Qatari intelligence operative working under diplomatic cover. Ilhan will handle the Iran vote as discussed. She understands the importance to your principles. The arrangement is working well for everyone. Next payment can be processed after the vote is confirmed. That's your husband, Congresswoman, explicitly stating that you'll vote a specific way on behalf of Qatari principles and mentioning next payment. That's not policy disagreement, that's pay-for corruption. Omar finally found her voice, though it was shaking. Those text messages are taken out of context. My husband was discussing what context makes next payment after the vote is confirmed acceptable. Bongino's voice was sharp. What context makes selling congressional votes to foreign governments legal? I'm genuinely curious what context you think exists here. My husband's business dealings are separate from my they're not separate when you're the product being sold. His business is giving foreign governments access to your vote. That's not consulting. That's brokering corruption. Senator Tom Cotton, attending the hearing as an observer, asked to be recognized. Deputy Director Bongino. I served in the army in Iraq and Afghanistan. I understand how foreign influence operations work. What you're describing sounds like a textbook foreign agent operation. Has the Congresswoman registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act? No, sir, she has not, which is another violation. Anyone who acts as an agent of a foreign government, which includes voting in Congress based on that foreign government's direction in exchange for payment, must register with the Department of Justice. Failure to register is a separate federal crime. Cotton's face was grim. So, she's not just corrupt, she's an unregistered foreign agent. That's correct, sir, and that's why this is a counterintelligence investigation, not just a corruption investigation. When a member of Congress secretly works for a foreign government, that's a national security threat. Bongino organized his papers and pulled out a financial analysis document. Let me show you one more thing about the money because it's important. This is a forensic accounting analysis of E Street Group's finances for 2023. The firm reported $3.2 million in revenue. But when FBI accountants examined where that money came from and where it went, something interesting emerged. He displayed a pie chart. Of that, $3.2 million, $250 came from the Qatari shell companies. $180 came from Turkish-linked entities. We'll get to that shortly. $2.07, $2.7 million came from Omar's own campaign committee. So, the vast majority of Tim Manette's income came from either Omar's campaign or foreign governments. This isn't a real business. It's a vehicle for funneling foreign money and campaign money into your household. He pulled out bank statements. And where did that money go? Within 30 days of receiving the $250 from Qatar, $45 paid for a Mercedes-Benz, $78 for personal travel to resorts in Turks and Souths, $35 to pay off credit card debt, $15 for jewelry and luxury goods, the remaining $77 deposited into personal bank accounts. None of it was used for actual business expenses. No office rent, no employee salaries, no business travel, just luxury purchases and personal expenses. That's not a consulting payment, Congresswoman. That's a bribe that you spent on cars and vacations. Representative Jim Jordan leaned forward. Deputy Director, you said you'd get to Turkey. Is there more foreign bribery beyond Qatar? Yes, Mr. Chairman, significantly more. The Qatar payment was just the beginning. Bongino closed his first folder and reached for the second labeled Turkey. Congresswoman Omar, Qatar paid you $250. That's bad, but what Turkey paid you for was worse. Let's discuss your votes on the Armenian genocide and why you suddenly became very friendly with an authoritarian regime that imprisons journalists and commits human rights abuses. Omar's lawyer was frantically trying to get her to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights and stop participating in the hearing. But she couldn't seem to process what was happening fast enough to follow his advice. And Bongino wasn't giving her time to regroup. The interrogation was just getting started. Bongino opened the second folder without pause, maintaining the relentless pressure that every experienced cop knows breaks down defenses. Congresswoman, let's talk about Turkey. In March 2023, 2 months after the Qatar payment, your husband's firm received another payment, this one for $180. It came from a company called Bosphorus Strategic Advisors. He displayed registration documents. Bosphorus Strategic Advisors sounds American, doesn't it? Professional name, but it's registered in Istanbul, Turkey. And when FBI traced its funding, we found it's backed by entities connected to the Turkish government. In fact, 3 of its 5 board members have direct ties to Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, what did Turkey pay you for? Let me show you the timeline. March 7, 2023, $180 wire transferred to E Street Group from Bosphorus Strategic Advisors. March 29, 2023, House votes on H.R.E. 296. Formally recognizing the Armenian genocide. March 29, 2023, you vote no on recognizing the Armenian genocide. Bongino let that hang in the air. For those who don't follow Turkish politics, let me explain why this matters. Turkey has spent a century denying the Armenian genocide, the systematic killing of 1.5 million Armenian Christians by the Ottoman Empire during World War I. It's one of the most well-documented genocides in history. Every reputable historian acknowledges it happened. But Turkey refuses to admit it because it would require acknowledging Ottoman war crimes and potentially paying reparations. He pulled out voting records. The House has voted on Armenian genocide recognition multiple times. In 2019, you voted yes to recognize it. In 2021, you voted yes again. Your position was clear and consistent. The Armenian genocide was real and should be formally acknowledged. But in March 2023, 3 weeks after receiving $180 from a Turkish government-linked entity, you suddenly voted no. You were one of only 12 members to vote against recognition. And you gave a floor speech arguing that historical grievances shouldn't drive current foreign policy and we need to strengthen our partnership with Turkey, not antagonize them with century-old disputes. Bongino looked directly at Omar. You changed your vote. You changed your position. You gave a speech defending Turkey's position. All after Turkey paid you $180. That's not evolving views, Congresswoman. That's purchased influence. Representative Matt Gaetz jumped in. Deputy Director, was there other Turkish-related activity around this time? Yes, sir. In June 2023, there was a vote on whether to sanction Turkey for purchasing Russian S-400 missile defense systems. A major national security concern since Turkey is a NATO ally, and these systems could compromise NATO operations. The Biden administration supported sanctions. Congressional leadership supported sanctions, but Congresswoman Omar voted no. She was one of only 11 members to vote against sanctioning Turkey. He pulled out more documents and then in July 2023 she traveled to Turkey again without proper notification to the State Department. She met with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and she praised him publicly. Let me read from her Twitter post after that meeting. Productive discussion with President Erdogan about Turkish-American cooperation. Turkey is a vital ally and we must strengthen our partnership. President Erdogan's leadership has brought stability to a turbulent region. Stability. Erdogan has imprisoned tens of thousands of political opponents, shut down independent media, attacked Kurdish populations, moved Turkey toward authoritarian one-man rule, undermined NATO at every turn. But you praised him after he paid you. Bongino pulled out email evidence. FBI executed search warrants on your husband's email accounts. We found correspondence between Tim Manet and Turkish intermediaries. Let me read one email from your husband to a Turkish official named Murat Yilmaz. Dear Mr. Yilmaz, thank you for the March payment. Ilhan will handle the Armenian vote as discussed. She understands the arrangement and the importance of this issue to Ankara. Regarding the S-400 sanctions vote in June, we'll need an additional payment to cover that. The political risk is higher on defense issues. I suggest $100 for that vote. Please confirm and we can proceed. Best regards, Tim. The hearing room erupted. Democrats were shouting. Republicans looked vindicated. The media was in a frenzy. Your husband, Bongino, continued over the noise, was negotiating the price of your congressional votes email by email, vote by vote, with foreign governments. That's the definition of corruption. Omar found her voice, though it was desperate. Now, my husband's business dealings. I don't control what he. But you do control how you vote. Bongino cut her off, and you voted exactly as these emails promised you would vote after the payments were made. Your husband was brokering sales of your congressional votes and you were delivering the product. Representative Tom Cotton spoke up again. Deputy Director, the Congresswoman sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. She has access to classified information about Turkey, including intelligence about their cooperation with Russia, their activities in Syria, their relationship with terrorist groups. If Turkey has compromised her with payments, what's the national security risk? Substantial Congressman. Turkey has direct ties to groups like Hamas and has facilitated their operations. Turkey has shared NATO intelligence with Russia. Turkey has undermined U.S. operations in Syria. If Turkey has a sitting member of the Foreign Affairs Committee on their payroll, they could be getting classified information about U.S. operations that they shouldn't have access to. That's why this is a counterintelligence investigation. Bongino pulled out more financial records, and the Turkish payments didn't stop at $180. In August 2023, another $75 came from a different Turkish entity. In November 2023, another $50. By the end of 2023, Turkish-linked organizations had paid your husband's firm a total of $300. And during that same period, you voted in Turki's interests on 9 separate occasions. He displayed a comprehensive chart showing payments and votes side by side. Every payment correlated with votes. Every vote aligned with Turkish interests. The pattern is undeniable. Qatar bought your votes. Turkey bought your votes. You weren't representing Minnesota's 5th District Congresswoman. You were representing Doha and Ankara. Representative Nancy Mace raised her hand. Deputy Director, you mentioned there was also Somalia. Is that another foreign government paying her? Yes, ma'am. And that one is even more disturbing because it involves weapons trafficking and potential connections to terrorism. That's the next folder. He closed the Turkey folder and reached for the third one labeled Somalia weapons deal. Congresswoman Omar, let's talk about your ancestral homeland. Let's talk about arms embargoes. Let's talk about your brother-in-law's company. And let's talk about how you tried to make $8 million by facilitating weapons sales that would have armed terrorists. For the first time, real fear crossed Omar's face. The Qatar and Turkey bribes were bad, but what Bongino was about to reveal was potentially treason. And everyone in the room could see it coming. Bongino opened the third folder. And even before he spoke, the thickness of the documentation was visible. This wasn't just financial records. There were photographs, text, message, transcripts, and what appeared to be surveillance logs. Congresswoman Omar, in 2021, you became a vocal advocate for lifting the U.S. arms embargo on Somalia. You gave interviews, you wrote op-eds, you lobbied your colleagues. You argued that the embargo was preventing Somalia from defending itself against al-Shabaab terrorists and that the Somali government needed weapons to maintain security. He pulled out a series of articles and videos showing Omar making these arguments. On its face, that's a legitimate foreign policy position. Reasonable people can disagree about arms embargoes. But what you didn't disclose to anyone, not to your colleagues, not to the House Ethics Committee, not to the American people, was that you had a direct financial interest in lifting that embargo. Bongino displayed a corporate registration document. This is Mogadishu Defense Systems, a Somali arms importing company registered in 2020. The company was created specifically to import and distribute weapons if the U.S. embargo was lifted. And one of the 3 principals of this company is Ahmed Maneh, your husband's brother, your brother-in-law. He pulled out financial projections, according to internal company documents that FBI obtained through search warrants. Mogadishu Defense Systems projected $40 million in revenue in the first year after the embargo was lifted. They had contracts lined up with the Somali government. They had supply chains established. They had everything ready to go. They just needed the U.S. embargo lifted. And you were working to make that happen. Representative Jordan interrupted. Deputy Director, are you saying she was advocating for a policy that would directly enrich her family members? Yes, Mr. Chairman, but it's worse than that because she wasn't just advocating. She was planning to personally profit from it. Bongino pulled out what appeared to be WhatsApp message transcripts. FBI obtained WhatsApp communications between Congresswoman Omar, her husband Tim Manette, and brother-in-law Ahmed Manette discussing the arms deal. Let me read some of these messages. December 15, 2021, Ilhan Omar to Tim Manette. When does Ahmed think the embargo will lift? I'm pushing hard in Congress, but need timeline. December 15, 2021, Tim Manette reply. He says if it happens by Q2 2022 company will hit 40 millers first year. We discussed terms, you'll get 15% of profits as agreed. December 15, 2021, Ilhan Omar reply 15% isn't enough given the risk I'm taking. Political exposure is massive. If this gets out I need 20%. December 16, 2021, Ahmed Manette joins conversation. We can do 20%. You're making this happen. Fair compensation, but payments need to be offshore. Cayman accounts. December 16, 2021, Ilhan Omar reply, agreed, 20% to Cayman account. Now, let me get this embargo lifted. The hearing room was in absolute chaos. Now, this wasn't just corruption, this was conspiracy planning, negotiation of criminal profits, all in writing. Congresswoman Omar Bongino continued relentlessly. You negotiated a 20% cut of a $40 million weapons deal. That's $8 million to yourself for using your congressional position to lift an arms embargo. And you wanted it paid to offshore accounts to hide it from U.S. authorities. He pulled out more messages. But here's where it gets really bad. Really, really bad, because FBI intelligence indicates that Mogadishu Defense Systems wasn't just planning to supply the Somali government. They had side deals to divert weapons to other buyers. And some of those buyers were al-Shabaab affiliates. The room went silent. Al-Shabaab is designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. They've killed Americans. They've conducted terrorist attacks across East Africa. They're allied with Al-Qaeda. And your brother-in-law's company was planning to sell them weapons. Bongino displayed surveillance photos. These are photographs taken by FBI surveillance teams in Mogadishu in early 2022. This man, he pointed to a figure in the photo, is Ahmed Manette, meeting with Hassan Ali KY, a known al-Shabaab facilitator. They're discussing weapons shipments. FBI had an informant in this meeting. Let me read from the informant's report. Ahmed Manette stated that once the U.S. embargo was lifted, the company could supply the Somali government officially while diverting 20 to 30% of shipments to alternate buyers for higher profit margins. When asked who these buyers were, Manette indicated armed groups in the region, including al-Shabaab affiliates. Manette stated his sister-in-law, the congresswoman, was working to lift the embargo and would receive percentage of all profits including from diverted sales. Representative Cotton stood up, his face red with fury. Let me understand this correctly. She was going to help arm al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization that's killed Americans, in exchange for $8 million. And she was using her position in Congress to make it happen. That's what the evidence indicates. Congressman, that's not corruption. Cotton shouted. That's treason. That's providing material support to terrorists. She should be arrested right now. Bongino held up his hand. Congressman, I understand your anger, but we have to follow due process. The evidence is being reviewed by the Department of Justice for potential charges under terrorism statutes. FAR, conspiracy and corruption laws, but yes, providing material support to designated terrorist organizations, even indirectly through weapons sales, is one of the most serious federal crimes on the books. Representative Ilhan Omar had gone completely pale. Her lawyer was physically trying to pull her out of her chair, now trying to end her participation in the hearing before more damage was done. But Bongino wasn't finished. Let me read one more message. This one from January 2022, after it became clear the embargo wasn't going to be lifted that year. Ilhan Omar to Ahmed Manette. Embargo push failed for now. Too much resistance. But I'll keep trying. This deal is too lucrative to abandon. 8 millimeters is 8 meters. Ahmed Manette understood. We'll keep everything ready. Al-Shabaab buyers are patient. When you get it lifted, we move fast. Ilhan Omar reply. Agreed. And nobody can know about the Al-Shabaab connection. If that gets out, I'm finished. This stays between us. Bongino looked up from the messages. If that gets out, I'm finished. You knew the weapons were going to terrorists. You knew it was illegal. You knew it was treasonous. And you tried to do it anyway because you wanted $8 million. He closed the folder. Congresswoman Omar, the FBI investigation into your conduct has uncovered Qatar bribes. $250. Turkey bribes. 305 attempted Somalia weapons deal profits $8 $1 total over $8.5 million in foreign corruption involving 3 different countries. Multiple federal crimes, and potential material support to terrorism. Chairman Jordan's voice was grim. Deputy Director Bongino, what's the timeline for DOJ charges? The Department of Justice is reviewing evidence for indictments as we speak. Mr. Chairman, I expect charges to be filed within days. Given the severity of the offenses and the national security implications, DOJ will likely recommend she be held without bail as a flight risk given her foreign connections and access to offshore funds. Representative Rashida Tlaib, one of Omar's closest allies in Congress, stood up to speak, but then sat back down, apparently unable to find words to defend what had just been revealed. Bongino organized his papers. Mr. Chairman, we've covered the foreign bribery. But there's more. We still need to discuss Congresswoman Omar's immigration fraud, including DNA evidence proving she married her biological brother to circumvent immigration law and her systematic campaign finance violations, including the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. If the committee wants to continue, we'll continue, Jordan said firmly. The American people need to hear all of it. Bongino reached for his 4th folder. Congresswoman Omar, let's talk about how you got to America. Let's talk about your marriages. Let's talk about the DNA test you've refused to take for years. And let's talk about why FBI took that choice away from you. Bongino opened the 4th folder, and this time Omar's lawyer physically put his hand over her mouth to prevent her from speaking. The man had finally realized that every word she said was digging her grave deeper. Congresswoman Omar, there's been speculation for years about your immigration history, specifically about your marriage to Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi from 2009 to 2017. Conservative media has alleged he was your biological brother and that you married him to circumvent immigration restrictions. You've called this a conspiracy theory. You've called it Islamophobic. You've called it racist lies. He pulled out a document, but you've never provided DNA evidence to disprove it. When asked repeatedly to take a DNA test to clear your name, you refused. You said it was beneath your dignity to respond to such allegations. You said demanding DNA proof was dehumanizing. Bongino looked up. But here's the thing about criminal investigations. Congresswoman, we don't need your permission. When FBI has probable cause to believe immigration fraud has occurred, we can obtain DNA samples through lawful means. And we did. He pulled out what appeared to be a laboratory report with official seals and signatures. This is a DNA analysis conducted by the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, one of the most respected forensic labs in the world. During our investigation into your finances and foreign contacts, we obtained DNA samples from you from Ahmed Noor Sedmi and from your father, Noor Omar Muhammad. The room was dead silent. The samples were obtained legally. Yours came from a coffee cup you discarded at a congressional hearing. Elmi's came from a cigarette butt during FBI surveillance. Your father's came from medical records he provided to immigration authorities during his own naturalization process. All lawfully obtained. All properly analyzed. Bongino held up the report. The results are conclusive and scientifically certain. Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi shares 50% of his DNA with you. Not cousin-level DNA similarity. That would be around 12.5%. Not second cousin level. That would be around 3%. Exactly 50%. That's the DNA match for full siblings who share both biological parents. He let that sink in. Ahmed Noor Elmi is your brother. Congresswoman, your biological brother, and you married him. Representative Matt Gaetz was on his feet. Deputy Director, is there any possibility the DNA test is wrong? Any chance of lab error? No, sir. DNA testing at this level is 99.9% accurate. We ran the test twice using different samples to confirm. Both tests showed the same result. Full sibling match. Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi is Ilhan Omar's biological brother. That's scientific fact. Bongino pulled out immigration documents. Now, let's talk about why this matters. Let's review your immigration history as you've publicly stated it. 95. You arrive in the U.S. as a refugee from Somalia with your father and siblings. 2002. You enter into a faith-based marriage with Ahmed Hai, not legally recognized. 2008. You separate from Hai. 2009. You legally marry Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi. 2011. Elmi obtains U.S. permanent residency based on marriage to you. 2017. You divorce Elmi. 2018. You legally marry Ahmed Hirsi. The timeline is suspicious on its face. Why marry Elmi in 2009? You've claimed he was a fellow Somali student and that it was a temporary marriage while you were separated from Hirsi. But that makes no sense. Why legally marry someone else while planning to reconcile with your first partner? He pulled out more documents. The real reason becomes clear when we look at immigration records. Ahmed Noor Said Al-Mi applied for U.S. residency in 2010 based on marriage to a U.S. citizen. He was granted permanent residency in 2011. Then conveniently you divorced him in 2017 and married Hirsi, the man you'd been living with the entire time. Bongino displayed a timeline chart. You married your brother to get him U.S. residency. That's immigration fraud, a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison and deportation. And before you argue there could be innocent explanations, let me address them. Could he be a half-sibling? No. The DNA shows 50% match, meaning same mother and same father. Could there be a mistake in the DNA collection? No. We tested twice with different samples. Could you have not known he was your brother? Impossible. You grew up together in Somalia before immigrating. There's no innocent explanation. You knowingly married your brother to commit immigration fraud. Representative Tom Cotton spoke up. Deputy Director, if she obtained her own immigration status through fraud, what happens to her citizenship? If someone obtains immigration benefits, including naturalization, through fraud, their citizenship can be revoked and they can be deported. Given that her brother obtained residency through a fraudulent marriage to her, and given her pattern of deception regarding her immigration history, ICE would have grounds to review her own citizenship status. Cotton's voice was heard so she could be deported. Yes, sir, immigration fraud is a deportable offense. If she loses her citizenship, she'd be deported to Somalia. Bongino pulled out tax records. But the immigration fraud isn't the only crime here. Let's talk about tax fraud. From 2009 to 2017, while you were legally married to your brother, you filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi, who you were not legally married to. That's perjury on your tax forms. You can't file joint returns with someone you're not married to. He displayed tax forms side by side. 2011 tax return filing status: married, filing jointly with Ahmed Hirsi, but your legal spouse was Ahmed Noor Said Elmi. 2012 tax return, same thing, married, filing jointly with the wrong person. 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016 all filed jointly with her while legally married to Elmi. Bongin looked up. That's 8 years of tax fraud. 8 separate federal crimes, each one punishable by up to 3 years in prison. And before you argue this was an innocent mistake, you're a lawyer. You knew what you were doing was illegal. You did it anyway. He pulled out one final document. And here's the kicker. When Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi applied for residency based on marriage to you, he had to submit marriage certificates, joint financial documents, photos together, all the proof that you were in a genuine marital relationship. You provided all of that. You signed affidavit swearing under oath that you were in a real marriage with him. Bongino displayed the affidavit, but you weren't. You were living with Hirsi the entire time. You were never in a real marriage with Elmi. You fabricated evidence of a marital relationship. Fake photos, fake documents, fake joint accounts to fool immigration authorities. That's fraud. That's perjury. That's conspiracy. Representative Nancy Mace raised her hand. Deputy Director, this is incredibly serious. Why wasn't this investigated before? It was, ma'am. Local media in Minneapolis raised questions as early as 2016. But without DNA evidence, it was circumstantial. The Congresswoman's denials were enough to avoid serious scrutiny. But once she became the subject of an FBI investigation for foreign bribery, we were able to obtain DNA samples legally. Now we have proof. Chairman Jordan looked at Omar, who was sitting with her head down, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Deputy Director, you mentioned there was one more folder. What's left to cover? Campaign finance violations, Mr. Chairman, including her involvement in the Feeding Our Future fraud, the largest pandemic fraud in American history, where $250 million meant to feed hungry children was stolen. We have evidence she took money from those criminals and protected them from investigation in exchange. That's the last folder. He reached for it, but before we get there, I want to summarize what we've established about Ilhan Omar foreign bribery from Qatar. $250. Foreign bribery from Turkey, $35. Attempted Somalia weapons deal, $8.000. Immigration fraud, married her brother. Tax fraud, 8 years of false returns. Her perjury, false affidavit to immigration authorities. Identity fraud, multiple fraudulent documents, and we haven't even gotten to her stealing from her own campaign donors yet. The hearing room was in complete pandemonium. Multiple Democrats had left entirely. Republicans were calling for immediate arrest. The media was in a frenzy. And Dan Bongino, the cop from Queens who'd become FBI deputy director, wasn't done. He had one more folder. And it would complete the picture of the most corrupt member of Congress in American history. Bongino opened the final folder with a sense of finality. Omar was broken. Her lawyer had given up trying to stop her from speaking. She wasn't speaking anymore anyway. She just sat there staring at the table as the man who'd once walked a beat in New York City systematically destroyed every aspect of her life. Let's talk about your campaign, Congresswoman, because your corruption didn't stop with foreign governments. You also stole from your own supporters, the people who donated to you thinking you'd fight for them. Instead, you used their money as a personal bank account. He pulled out FEC reports and financial statements. Between 2019 and 2024, your campaign committee paid your husband Tim Manette's firm E Street Group exactly $2,738, almost $3 million from your campaign to your husband's company. The FEC investigated this and found violations. You paid a fine. Case closed. Right. Bongino shook his head. Wrong. Because the FEC didn't know about the foreign payments we just discussed. They thought the $2.7 million was standard if excessive campaign consulting fees. But now we know some of that money was actually foreign money being laundered through your campaign. He displayed a complex financial flowchart. Here's how it worked. Qatar pays $250 to E Street Group. Air Group then bills your campaign for consulting services $300. Your campaign pays Group from donor funds. Now the Qatar money looks like clean campaign money. That's money laundering, Congresswoman. That's using your campaign as a criminal enterprise to clean foreign bribes. Representative Jim Jordan leaned forward. Deputy Director. So donors were unknowingly providing money that was used to legitimize foreign payments. Exactly, Mr. Chairman. Donors gave to her campaign thinking they were supporting her political work. Instead, their money was being used to disguise bribes from Qatar and Turkey. That's wire fraud. That's mail fraud because fundraising appeals went through the mail. That's theft by deception. Bongino pulled out another set of documents. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the Feeding Our Future fraud. The $250 million scheme where criminals claimed to be feeding hungry children during CO but actually just stole the money. The largest pandemic fraud in American history. He displayed photos of several individuals. These are people who were later convicted in the Feeding Our Future fraud. Amy Bach, Director of Feeding Our Future, convicted of fraud. Abdik Abdullahi Idol, convicted of conspiracy and money laundering. Abdi Aziz Shafi Ferrara, convicted, sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. Said Shafi Farah, convicted of fraud, and all of them donated to your campaign. Total contributions $16,100. Bongino pulled out donation records. Now getting donations from people who later turn out to be criminals isn't necessarily your fault. But here's the problem. FBI raided their operations in January 2022. The fraud became public knowledge. Major news story. Everyone in Minnesota knew these people had stolen from children. And you kept their money for over a year. You didn't return it until March 2023. 14 months later. And only after local media started asking questions. He pulled out emails. But it's worse than just keeping their money. FBI obtained emails between you and Amy Bach from 2021 before the fraud was exposed. Let me read one from Amy Bach to Representative Ilhan Omar. Date August 12, 2021. Subject: Federal oversight concerns. Repan Omar. We are facing increased scrutiny from federal auditors regarding our meal distribution program. We need your help pushing back on this overreach. The auditors are asking for documentation that would be burdensome to provide. Can you intervene with federal oversight agencies? Your response. Amy. I'll reach out to HHS and USDA contacts about the audit. Federal government shouldn't make it harder for organizations serving our community. We'll protect you from overreach. Let me know if you need anything else. Congresswoman. She was asking you to protect her from federal auditors who were investigating fraud. And you agreed. You used your congressional position to try to interfere with a federal fraud investigation. That's obstruction of justice. He pulled out more emails. And there's more. In November 2021, Amy Boach, the audit pressure is increasing. Can you help delay their investigation? Your reply? Working on it. Have reached out to oversight officials. They should back off soon. Appreciate your support for my campaign. You explicitly connected protecting her from investigation to her campaign donations. That's a quid pro quo. That's corruption. Representative Matt Gaetz stood up. His voice angry. Deputy Director, are you telling us she took money from people stealing from hungry children? Then tried to protect them from investigation and only returned the money after she got caught? Yes, sir. That's exactly what happened. And there's one more email I need to read. This is from December 2021 after Bach donated another 2.800 Ilhan Omar to Amy Bach. Received your contribution will continue running interference with federal overseers. These investigations are harassment of community organizations. Let me know if pressure increases. She was taking money from criminals and protecting them from federal investigators who were trying to stop the theft of $250 million from programs meant to feed children. That's not politics. That's racketeering. Bongino organized all his folders in a row. Let me summarize everything we've established today about Representative Ilhan Omar foreign corruption. Qatar bribery $250. Turkey bribery $35. Somalia weapons deal attempt $8.000. Foreign agent violations FAR 3 counts. Money laundering through campaign 4 counts. Immigration fraud. Married her biological brother. DNA proven. Immigration fraud 1 count. Tax fraud 8 counts. False joint returns. Perjury on immigration documents multiple counts. Identity fraud multiple counts. Campaign fraud. Illegal payments to spouse $20 738.000.000 money laundering through campaign multiple counts taking money from fraud criminals $100 obstruction of federal investigation 2 counts wire fraud multiple counts mail fraud multiple counts total financial corruption over $11 million total federal felony counts 47. The hearing room was silent except for the sound of cameras clicking and reporters typing. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, I've been a cop for 25 years. NYPD patrol officer, Secret Service agent, and now FBI deputy director. I've investigated murderers, terrorists, organized crime figures, and corrupt politicians. I've seen a lot of bad people do a lot of bad things. You are one of the most comprehensively corrupt individuals I have ever investigated. You sold your office to foreign governments. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud. You stole from your campaign donors. You protected criminals who stole from hungry children. You did all of this while presenting yourself as a champion of the oppressed and vulnerable. You're not a champion. You're a fraud. You're a criminal. And you belong in federal prison. Chairman Jordan's voice was grim. Deputy Director Bongino, what happens next? Bongino looked at his watch. At 2 p.m. today, approximately 2 hours from now, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia will unseal indictments charging Ilhan Omar with 47 federal felonies. FBI agents are currently en route to execute search warrants on her congressional offices. Her residence in Washington, D.C., her residence in Minneapolis, and her husband's business offices. At approximately 300 p.m., FBI agents will arrest Representative Omar. She will be processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and held pending arraignment. Given the severity of the charges, including potential material support to terrorism, and given her access to foreign funds and foreign contacts, the Department of Justice will recommend she be held without bail as a substantial flight risk. Omar's lawyer was frantically gathering papers, preparing to leave. Congresswoman Omar, Bongino said, looking directly at her, I'd suggest you make arrangements for your children. You're going to federal prison for a very long time. He stood up. Mr. Chairman, my testimony is complete. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee has. But there were no questions. What could anyone ask? The evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was irrefutable. The charges were coming. Representative Ilhan Omar sat frozen at the witness table. Her political career over her freedom measured in hours. The cop had done his job and justice was about to be served. 24 hours later, the footage played on every network in an endless loop. FBI agents escorting Representative Ilhan Omar from her congressional office in handcuffs. Her hijab slightly askew. Her face pale and drawn. The perp walk America had been waiting for. CNN breaking news. FBI arrests Rapple Omar on 47 felony charges. MSNBC. Omar indicted foreign bribery. Immigration fraud campaign violations. Fox News breaking. Congresswoman arrested following explosive Bongino testimony. BBC US. Congresswoman charged with being foreign agent. Within 48 hours of the arrest, FBI raided her offices and homes, seizing computers, phones, financial documents. All her bank accounts were frozen pending asset forfeit proceedings. Her security clearance was immediately revoked. She was removed from all congressional committees. House Democratic leadership called for her resignation. Minnesota governor called for special election to fill her seat. Progressive allies including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib issued statements deeply concerned by the allegations but notably did not defend her. Even CAIR Council on American Islamic Relations, which had previously supported her, withdrew its backing week 1. The 147-page federal indictment was unsealed and became the most downloaded government document in history. The evidence was devastating. 73 pages of wire transfer documentation showing foreign payments. NSA intercept transcripts of Qatari officials discussing Omar as their asset. WhatsApp messages negotiating vote prices with Turkey. Text messages about the Somalia weapons deal. My cut needs to be 15%. DNA lab reports proving brother marriage. 8 years of fraudulent tax returns. Emails protecting, feeding our future criminals from investigation. The indictment charged 5 counts of bribery of public official, 3 counts of acting as unregistered foreign agent. FARA, 6 counts of money laundering, 1 count of conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism, 1 count of immigration fraud, 8 counts of tax fraud, 6 counts of perjury, 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of mail fraud, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 8 counts of campaign finance violations. Total 47 federal felonies, each carrying 5 to 20 years in prison. At her arraignment, federal magistrate Judge Rita Harrison, an Obama appointee, heard arguments about bail. Prosecutor: Your Honor, the defendant has access to millions in foreign funds, maintains relationships with foreign governments, and faces potential life imprisonment. She is an extreme flight risk. Qatar, Turkey, and Somalia do not have extradition treaties with the United States. We request she be held without bail. Omar's attorney: Your Honor, my client is a sitting member of Congress. She has 3 children. She's not a flight risk. We request reasonable bail conditions, including home confinement and surrender of passport. Judge Harrison: The evidence of foreign payments and foreign contacts is substantial. The defendant has demonstrated access to offshore accounts and foreign support. Given the severity of charges, including potential terrorism-related offenses, the court finds the defendant is a flight risk. Bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. Omar was sent to Federal Detention Center in Alexandria, Virginia, where she would await trial. Week 2. The political fallout accelerated. House Speaker Mike Johnson called for immediate expulsion proceedings. A member under indictment for acting as a foreign agent cannot continue to serve in Congress and maintain access to classified information. House Democratic leader Hockey Jeff, after initially defending due process, reviewed the indictment and reversed course. These allegations, if proven, represent a fundamental betrayal of the oath of office. Representative Omar should resign immediately. The House voted 418-3 to remove Omar from Congress pending trial. The only 3 votes against removal came from the most progressive members, and even they issued statements saying they voted on procedural grounds not to defend her conduct. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called a special election for her seat. 8 candidates immediately announced, including several Somali Americans who explicitly campaigned on restoring honor to our community after Omar's betrayal. Month 3. The trial, United States villain Omar, began on a Monday morning in Washington, D.C. federal court. Judge Paul Friedman, a Clinton appointee with a reputation for fairness, presided. The prosecution was led by the U.S. Attorney personally, almost unheard of, signaling the importance of the case. Opening statement: Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that the defendant sold her congressional office to the highest bidder. Qatar paid her. Turkey paid her. She planned to profit from arming terrorists. She married her brother to commit immigration fraud. She stole from her donors. The evidence is overwhelming, documented, and irrefutable. And at the end of this trial, we will ask you to hold her accountable. Omar's defense team tried to argue entrapment, selective prosecution, and Islamophobia. Defense opening: This is a political prosecution of a Muslim woman who dared to criticize U.S. foreign policy. The government has taken normal political fundraising and twisted it into conspiracy theories. They've taken family relationships and turned them into fraud accusations. This is persecution, not prosecution, but the evidence was devastating. Week 1 of trial, FBI financial expert testified for 3 days, walking through every wire transfer, every shell company, every foreign payment, bank records showing $555 from foreign sources, timeline charts correlating payments to votes. Defense couldn't challenge the financial evidence. It was all documented. Week 2, FBI linguist played translated NSA intercepts of Qatari officials. Omar has been very helpful. She is now our asset. Turkish emails. Ilhan will handle the Armenian vote as discussed. WhatsApp messages about Somalia. My cut needs to be 15%. Defense tried to suppress the electronic evidence but failed. Judge ruled all communications were lawfully obtained. Week 3. FBI DNA expert explained the sibling match. 99.9% certainty. Ahmed Nur Sahed Elmi is her biological brother. Immigration fraud investigator detailed the fake marriage documents. IRS agent testified about 8 years of fraudulent tax returns. Defense had no rebuttal. The DNA didn't lie. Week 4. Feeding our future victims testified. We trusted her to protect our children. She protected the criminals instead. FBI agent read emails showing Omar interfering with federal fraud investigation. Campaign finance expert showed how foreign money was laundered through her campaign. Defense called no witnesses. They had no defense. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Verdict: guilty on 43 of 47 counts. Not guilty on 2 wire fraud counts. Insufficient evidence of intent. Not guilty on 2 campaign finance counts. Statute of limitations, but guilty on everything else. All foreign bribery counts. Guilty. All FAR counts. Guilty. All money laundering counts. Guilty. Conspiracy to support terrorism. Guilty. Immigration fraud. Guilty. All tax fraud counts. Guilty. All perjury counts. Guilty. Obstruction of justice. Guilty. Omar sobbed as the verdicts were read. Her children in the gallery were crying. Her husband Tim Monet, who'd taken a plea deal to testify against her in exchange for reduced charges, sat stone-faced. Sentencing. 4 months later, federal judge Paul Friedman, who'd presided over the trial, delivered the sentence. Ms. Omar, this court has presided over many criminal cases in 25 years on the federal bench. I have never seen a more comprehensive betrayal of public trust than what you have perpetrated. You sold your office to foreign governments. You betrayed the constituents who elected you to represent them. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud, deceiving the very immigration system that gave your family refuge. You stole from your own campaign donors. You protected criminals who stole from hungry children during a pandemic. You have disgraced the office of United States Representative. You have brought shame to the Somali American community that supported you. You have validated every negative stereotype about refugees and immigrants who come to this country seeking opportunity. You came to America as a refugee. You were given opportunity. You became a citizen. You were elected to Congress. One of only 535 people in a nation of 330 million given that honor. And you betrayed everything this country stands for. The sentencing guidelines suggest 20 to 25 years. The government has requested the high end. Your attorneys have requested leniency. This court finds no basis for leniency. Your crimes were calculated, deliberate, and persistent over many years. You showed no remorse until you were caught. You have accepted no responsibility even now. This court sentences you to 22 years in federal prison on the foreign corruption charges to run consecutively with 8 years on the immigration fraud charges to run consecutively with 5 years on the obstruction charges. Total 35 years in federal prison. You will serve at least 85% of this sentence before parole eligibility, approximately 30 years. Additionally, upon completion of your sentence, you will be deported to Somalia. Your U.S. citizenship, which was obtained through the fraudulent brother marriage, is hereby revoked. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has a detainer lodged against you for removal proceedings upon your release from federal custody. You will forfeit all assets obtained through your criminal conduct, approximately 3.7 venues in accounts, property, and valuables. Bailiff the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons for Dan Bongino, FBI. Deputy Director Bongino held exactly one press conference after the conviction. I want to be clear about something. This investigation wasn't about politics. It wasn't about religion. It wasn't about partisanship. It was about evidence. The FBI doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, Christian or Muslim, progressive or conservative. We care about your conduct. And Ilhan Omar's conduct was criminal. Comprehensively, systematically, deliberately criminal. If a Republican member of Congress did the same things, took foreign bribes, committed immigration fraud, protected criminals, I would investigate them with equal vigor. The FBI works for the American people, not for any party or ideology. That's all I have to say. His approval ratings remained extraordinarily high. Overall 71%, Republicans 94%, Independents 68%, Democrats 43%. Even many progressives admitted grudgingly that the evidence was overwhelming and the investigation was professional. Bongino declined all book deals, speaking offers, and media opportunities beyond that single press conference. He continued serving as FBI Deputy Director, focusing on counterintelligence operations and public corruption cases for America. Congress passed the Congressional Accountability and Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. Mandatory real-time disclosure of all foreign contacts by members. Quarterly financial audits of member-related entities. Automatic ethics review for any member receiving foreign funds. Enhanced background checks for committee assignments involving classified information. Immediate suspension of security clearances upon criminal indictment. Automatic expulsion for conviction of foreign agent violations. The Omar case became the textbook example of foreign corruption. Law schools studied it. FBI Academy used it for counterintelligence training. Political science courses analyzed what went wrong and how it was detected. The lesson was clear: no matter who you are, no matter what office you hold, if you betray America, you will be caught. And if you're unlucky enough to be investigated by Dan Bongino, you're going to prison. Final scene. 3 years later, Dan Bongino sat in his FBI office reviewing files for yet another corruption investigation. Another member of Congress, more suspicious payments, more foreign contacts. The work never ended. His phone rang. It was his former NYPD partner, now retired. Danny, I saw the news. Omar got denied parole at her 3-year review. Good, she'll do the full 30 years she earned every day. You know, she still claims she's innocent. Still says it was political persecution. Bongino smiled. They always do. But her appeals have been denied at every level. 3 different federal judges reviewed the case. All upheld the conviction. The evidence was overwhelming. You did good work on that case. I did my job. Same job I did on the street in Queens 20 years ago. Same job I'm doing now. Catch criminals. Present evidence. Bedded juries decide. That's it. Think Congress learned anything from it? Bongino looked at the files on his desk. 2 senators and another representative under investigation for similar foreign influence schemes. Some learned, others didn't, but that's why FBI exists. To catch the ones who didn't learn. He hung up and returned to his work. Because in Washington, D.C., corruption never sleeps, but neither does the cop.